ensayar rápido, no sabes poner lo ensayas rápido, no sabes poner
We're back. This is Civil Discourse Now. This is April 7th, 2012. I'm Mark Small.
I'm Paul Ogden. I would point out it's the Easter weekend. One of my favorite holidays growing up was Easter, where we get the big chocolate bunny and we do Easter egg hunts. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to do that. I shouldn't say I'm not allowed to. I don't have children, so I don't do that anymore.
Well,
it's not like if I'm paying for it.
Saying here, you're on the non-Easter list. Paul, do you have a disclaimer?
Disclaimer, I'm a candidate for Marion County Superior Court judge, and as such, there are certain rules that apply, and one is that I'm not supposed to make pledges or promises to support certain positions. So if this issue, what is war, comes before me, I will approach it with an open mind based on the facts.
Well, and our guests today are James Neese, who's a Libertarian candidate for the 89th District here in Indiana, and that would be on the east side of Indianapolis.
Yep. It's east, where Emerson is, it's on the east side of Emerson.
And do you have a website?
Yeah. It's jamesneese.website.com.
And our other panelist is Jeff Cox.
Howdy.
Howdy, Jeff. Do you have a website?
Yeah, my blog is No Boxes Allowed. It's for liberal conservatives and conservative liberals. It can be found at www.no-boxes-allowed.blogspot.com.
There's more conservatism in that than the national forest.
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what that means either.
Because you said like conservative liberals, conservative Republicans. So
No, it's for conservative liberals and liberal conservatives.
yeah, but what I'm saying is like a joke. It's like conservation concern. So
Okay.
There's a pun.
yeah,
It's a pun.
it's okay. Then we'll get the next one.
I guess it wasn't a very good pun. That's the issue there.
We're discussing whether a declaration of war is necessary for the U.S. to commit military forces in a conflict. And that would be redundant. Commit military forces. I mean, if there's no conflict, you wouldn't commit military forces.
You could. I mean, there's tons of times we commit forces to peacekeeping missions, to Africa, through parts of Asia, where I have to go and get aid to that. Sri Lanka is a good example of committing troops to peaceful.
Well, and let's go through some of the instances in which we have placed military forces and there was no declaration of war. One of the most dominant examples from my lifetime, only it's been a while ago now, is the Vietnam so-called war. That was initiated by the Tonkin Gulf Resolution that was passed in Congress in 1964, August 1964. Later was shown to be a fraud. There, in fact, would be no attack of North Vietnamese vessels on a U.S. destroyer. That was what had predicated the president to say, well, we need forces over there. Really, a lot of corporations wanted to have a war because they made a lot of money. And as a consequence of that, over 50,000 American personnel were killed in Vietnam. Over 1 million, I've read estimates, of Vietnamese were killed. There was no ostensible gain in democratic values or regime change that was positive from what our perspective was at the time. And there was no declaration of war.
But Mark, at the time, the early 60s, wasn't there, and I read from history books and watched a lot of film about, because I was very young, but wasn't there a push for us to get involved in Vietnam, that there were atrocities going on over there? And I remember that there were actually protests and rallies on college campuses to get us in Vietnam.
I certainly don't remember protests to get us involved in Vietnam.
Protests might not be the right word, but that there were some atrocities going on over there and that we should get involved.
that was done by the North Vietnamese Army and the National Liberation Front, that we know as the Viet Cong.
Well, and also carried out by the government of the Republic of Vietnam, and that was the South Vietnamese. They were doing their fair share of atrocities too.
Yeah, but not nearly as much as the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese government.
Well, when Buddhist monks burned themselves in protest of the government, it wasn't in protest of the government of North Vietnam. It was in protest of the government of South Vietnam. And the government of South Vietnam wasn't a democratically elected government. They were a democratically elected government in the sense of like Richard Daley was democratically elected in Chicago. It was not 98% for whomever it was from the government that was running. And there was no real opposition, so it wasn't a democratic government. And those leaders were brought in by the French after they had lived for decades away from Vietnam and were Vietnamese only because they'd been born there but moved away for a long time.
As I recall, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the issue with Vietnam, like you said, was mostly a corporate interest. People wanted to profiteer off the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. But during that time, McCarthyism was on the way out, but there was still prominent down with how McCarthyism wanted to go. We have to get rid of, these people that are social. We get rid of communists. We get rid of anybody that's anti-American capitalism. It wasn't an issue with capitalism itself. So we go over to Vietnam. We go over to like these nation states over there that are in the throes of revolution. There's a lot of communists here. There's a lot of socialists here. We're throwing what we're going to do. We'll no longer have an ally in the East at this point within Vietnam. So how do we work with them to do this? So we commit troops. You need a reason because everybody needs a hero. So I drafted resolution with this boat. I drafted resolutions with, we have to go get them or they'll get us. Because you're making these people out to be, heroes like the people that weren't the Viet Cong. It's like, we got to put you out there, put our troops out there. These are American patriots. They got to do what we want to do. Well, you're only just going there to eliminate, socialist revolutionaries. We did that in Cuba. We did that in Grenada. We did that in, Colombia as well. Anytime, like the history up until the mid-90s, if there was a socialist uprising, we were there to stop it. We were there to squash it in its front steps.
And we should be.
And especially in Grenada, where it's like we were building an airstrip, which, it's like American commercial people have built the airstrip said, this was just for flights to and from Grenada. There's no military use, whatever. They were telling the government this over and over and over. It's just for commercial flights only.
Except that's not the case with the airstrip. It was able to use strategic bombers.
But
and then the government there was overthrown by some people who were loyal to Fidel Castro, who's one of the most evil bastards you will ever find in the Western Hemisphere.
The airport was being used by medical students who were going to medical school offshore because they didn't have the board scores to get into medical school here, even in a backup school.
Oh, that's a real good support for the case. If these people aren't good enough to be doctors, and so we should let them go to Grenada to do them, then they'll probably sneak their way in here again.
So that's a reason.
Is that your way to cut healthcare costs, by having substandard doctors?
No, but I'm saying that we intervene militarily where we don't like the political choice that people in a place have made.
I mean, how is Grenada a threat? I mean, there's one airstrip. Grenada has probably 1/100th of our population. It doesn't have any military force.
I don't think there was any claim that Grenada was going to be a threat to us. The claim was that they were proxies for other parties, like the Soviet Union, who planned to use that airstrip to their advantage in any conflict with the United States. That is why the United States was involved in all these conflicts all over the world, because these other countries were willing to provide their strategic resources, their harbors, their air bases to the Soviet Union, run by communists, who were the most murderous people who ever walked the face of the earth.
No,
honest about that.
No, they're not the most murderous people to ever walk.
Yeah, they are.
They are. There have been dictatorial regimes that have been communist, that have been murderous. There have been dictatorial regimes that have maintained some form of capitalism that have been murderous. You can look at various economic systems, and there have been regimes that have been murderous in each one of those.
I didn't say that there weren't murderous regimes and everything. I said the communists were the most murderous.
Well, and I would say that number one all-time mass killer is Mao. I mean, he's got the numbers, but he really wasn't.
Oh, solid.
No, Stalin's number 2.
Well, Mao's a communist.
No, he wasn't. He was a Maoist. He only used communism because it was convenient.
That's a type of communism.
I mean, that's just assuming modern history. I mean, I can go back to all ancient history. I can say that Genghis Khan was worse than anybody because he just went from nation to nation to nation, from raping and pillaging all the way through.
I don't think
That wasn't a communist.
I don't think Genghis Khan killed 60 million people.
It was
We
50
don't know how many
million.
people
There's no. They didn't have the population to kill 60 million people back then.
But let's back up a second. And let's go back to our original topic. And the original topic is whether the United States should have a declaration of war to engage in use of military force. Okay, so we perceive that other countries around the world are being used as proxies by a government that eventually collapsed because it was spending so much militarily and also because it didn't function economically and historically did not engage in land invasions as such. Russia was always, they were letting people invade
Afghanistan?
them. They were right there next to them. They weren't
They
around
invaded
the
them.
Yeah, but that's what brought down the Soviet Union.
They invaded Afghanistan. They invaded the Baltic states.
Okay, wait. They invaded Eastern Europe, okay, because of a deal that was cut at the end of World War II between Churchill and the Soviet Union.
No. They specifically invaded the Baltic states.
No, they didn't.
Yes.
Okay. But they haven't invaded overseas, and the instances of like the Soviet Union being involved overseas don't necessarily mean we need to. They're friends with that government that was democratically elected. We need to send our military in.
Well, for Russia itself, I mean, the only reason that we would invade the Balkan, and the only reason we would be interested in Afghanistan, these regions next to that, is because Russia does not have a warm water port. So when it invades the Balkans and the Baltic Sea area, that gives them a warm water port for trade. They will take that area because they didn't own that area. That was owned by Catherine the Great a long time ago. So they wanted these warm water ports, but they lost that due to revolutions and the search to break down. So of course they're going to want to get that back because that's their trade port. If they don't have any area in the Baltic, they can't get any trade out. The only place they can go is through, Eastern Russia through
Vladivostok.
Yeah. Oh, therefore, it's okay if they invade the Baltics.
No. But that's explaining why it is that they don't culturally and historically they don't pose a threat to invade us, whereas we invaded Russia right after World War I.
We have nothing to gain. If Russia, with great respect to most Russian people, and except if one invade the United States, is almost everyone in the United States has a weapon. That is a tremendous amount of research you're going to see. Even if you do manage to invade, they have to deal with our strategic military weapons in place. Everything to deal with everyday citizens are armed with hunting rifles, shotguns, handguns. We're the most armed citizenry in the world. It's almost ridiculous to invade us at one point because most countries cannot hold a land invasion here for very long. I mean,
Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen
in Red Dawn.
Yeah.
I mean, people look at that video.
You're citing Red Dawn.
It was a
Okay, I need to look for some cinematic authority to support my position that that we were threatened. How about the miniseries America? With Chris Christopherson, as president, and Sam Neill as an East German officer. Hey, my cinematic authority is just as good as yours, babe.
My point though is that countries don't pose a threat to us, a direct threat. If another country has a system of government or an economic system that poses competition to us, then does that mean that we're justified in using armed force against them?
Communism, Marxism, Leninism, by its very nature,
By their very nature, those are all different things.
by its very nature, is expansionist. It cannot have competition.
We're almost out of time for this segment. So is Christianity and Islam. We'll be back in just a minute.
Ensayar rápido, no pasa nada.